What's up, guys? Welcome back to another watch restoration. Today we have an awesome Bulova watch from 1949, and this is a little one. This is a women's watch, and these were, the popular size and form factor for many, many years. And this one comes my way via a Girl Scout cookie delivery. And it's kind of a funny story. My buddy John, his daughter Evelynn, is in Girl Scouts, and she was doing, the cookie fundraising thing. And of course, my wife and I needed to buy some cookies. So when Evelynn was delivering them, the family came in, and we were chatting over some coffee and stuff. And she noticed my watch station, my desk set up with all my stuff, and started asking questions. So I explained how watches worked and, kind of gave her the behind the scenes. And she seemed pretty fascinated and curious about it. And John texted me later and said that as a family, they were watching, some of my videos on the channel here. And I thought that was really cool. So I said, you know what, John, I think we should pick up a watch and I can film it and record it all. And then Evelynn can keep this as a, keepsake and maybe spark some curiosity in this hobby, or just serve as a cool little timepiece for her. And so we're diving into this. And this Bulova, Bulova was a popular American watch brand, and they made tons and tons of watches, and they're super popular. I've actually fixed 2 heirloom watches in my family that were just like this, so I've cut my teeth on this movement, and I'm very familiar with it. It's a 6AH, and it's a Swiss-made 17 jewel movement. And this thing's pretty little, as I mentioned earlier. It's about the size of, probably someone's fingertip. It's quite a bit smaller than mine, but I'm a pretty big guy. But yeah, pulling this out, you can see it's crusted in there a little bit. We'll gently wiggle that back and forth until we can get it out. I think sometimes when people replace the crystal, they glue it right to the dial, and that's what it looks like. That's why it was sticking in there. You can see the glue on the dial there around the edge, but that's all good. No big deal. And this one is running, and that's a really great sign. These are not shock protected, so the pivots or, the little axle on that bit moving there, the flywheel, or what we call the balance, those pivots break really easily. If you drop the watch or knock it too hard against something, you can actually break those. So we're going to remove that piece first off because that is so fragile. Between that and then the little hairspring, which you can barely see there. You can see it stretched out there. That hairspring is super, super fragile, and we have to be really careful not to bend that, because if you do, the watch will not run properly. Yeah, so we'll get that out of there. And, one thing I like to do is see if the fork's going back and forth freely. And you can see this one really is. So who knows? This may have been serviced really recently, or it may have, just avoided being too dirty or too worn or whatever. So it's running. That's great news. We're going to pull the hands off here, and we've covered the dial up with a plastic bag. Oh, you can see those little hands stuck right to it with the static. But yeah, pulling those off of there, nice and easy. No surprises. And we'll move on to removing the dial by pulling out a couple little screws on the side here. These little dial screws are pretty teeny, so we want to be careful not to lose those. I normally just screw them back into place after I remove the dial, but you can also pull them out and store them safely somewhere else. But yeah, so I'll kind of wedge a screwdriver under there gently, and then you can see I'm working my tweezers back and forth. We don't want to bend the posts or the dial feet on the backside of this. They're just little brass bits that go into the movement, and then the screws hold it into place. We pulled off the dial washer, which goes on the hour wheel there, which we just removed. And then in the center is the cannon pinion and all that good stuff, but we'll get to that later. The keyless works is working correctly, and that's all of those components there. And the name keyless works comes from, when technology advanced and they didn't need a key anymore to set the time on the watch or wind it up. They just went with keyless works. Because you don't need a key. It's keyless. So that's pretty cool. Moving on, we're letting the power out of the mainspring there. I moved the click out of the way, and that allows the power out of the watch. And then we use our fingertips against the crown, and that will let us slowly release that power. And then we're going to pull out the pallet fork bridge here. And you can see that kind of stuck in there and it popped out. You want to be really careful because these pivots are really teeny on the pallet fork. And you can see that there. One tip kind of looks like a fork, or maybe like a Triton. It's got 3 prongs. And then on the back side, we've got some jewels. And those are super crucial because we'll get into it a little bit later, but essentially all of the power from the spring is let out gradually, and then eventually it knocks that piece back and forth using those jewels, and then the little fork actually corresponds with that flywheel we took out earlier, which is called the balance. And that motion transfers the rotational energy into that kind of back and forth swinging. And that's how we regulate the speed at which the gears in the watch move. And of course, that's how we keep the hands moving at the rate we want. So it's a really ingenious thing. But yeah, speaking of gears, let's get into the train of wheels. And you can see this plate, which is called a bridge, has 3 jewels, and the little pivots to each of those wheels or gears goes through one of those jewels. And that reduces friction and helps the watch last much longer. Metal on metal wears much quicker than metal on the jewel. So that's a really great thing to see in an old watch. And that should mean this will last a long time. The escape wheel there came out. And again, the funny teeth on there hit the jewel on the pallet fork. And that's what we call the escapement. And that's where the power escapes the watch. So that's where it gets its name. Moving on, we've got a couple of wheels that are underneath of this other bridge. Now, we've got a little bit of a problem here. And these screws, the heads are snapped in half. You can see, the shiny part there, and then a hole next to it where the other half of the screw head was. So to get that out of there, we'll have to think through a couple of options, and I'll do a little bit of poking to see if, we have some options available to us. But moving on, I'm going to remove the one good screw and then some of the other components as I think through that. But yeah, so we'll pull that one out, and you can see sometimes they're picky and you have to spin it out a little bit more. Yep, there we go. All right, so yeah, you can see those really clearly here. They're snapped right in half. Half of the screw is missing. And that means we won't be able to use it normally, but we'll get to that. Now, this is what's called the crown wheel, and the crown wheel has a crown wheel screw, which is a reverse thread. And then this is the ratchet wheel, and that has a normal threaded screw. So this one is a lefty-tighty situation or a righty-loosey. And so we want to make sure we put that back where it goes. And then you can see this one has a longer stem to the screw. And that one is a normal thread. So you turn that righty-tighty, as the old saying goes. Pulling the crown wheel out, and then the ratchet wheel here, you can see this one has a square opening for the arbor, and that's what allows us to transfer power into the mainspring of the watch. And if that was round, of course, it would just spin, but because it's square, it transfers power downward into the mainspring, which resides underneath. We pulled the stem out of there, and then now we're going to remove the click. And the click is held in with a screw, and this screw is too thin for my screwdriver, so I'm going to reprofile it a little bit. This is what's called an Arkansas stone, but it's essentially just a sharpening stone. And we're able to make the screwdriver just a little bit sharper to fit into that little fine screw head. So that's a pretty common thing that you have to do, keeping up with the proper screwdriver profile as you work on movements. And we'll pull the click out of there, and it went flying, which is all good. We got it. And you can see that little guy. I always think it looks like a goldfish cartoon, like when you're a kid and you make those little goldfish. That's what it looks like to me. But we pulled the spring out of there, and we covered it up with a piece of wood. We call that peg wood, just so it doesn't go flying when we pop it out of there. Yeah, and now I'm just kind of surveying the scene here and seeing what we need to do next. And we got to get to those screws, those broken screws. So what I think I'm going to try is pushing up against the side with my screwdriver. So I'm not using the screwdriver how you normally would, where you can just rotate it freely. I'm kind of actually just pushing against the side of the screw, which of course rotates it. So it looks similar, but of course we're not doing quite the same thing. We don't have a slot to hold the screwdriver's blade, or the the head of the screwdriver. And so getting that out of there, I use the tweezers to get the rest of the way to minimize any scoring on the side of that opening in the bridge. But yeah, you can see they're cleaved right off. And that's either from over tightening, or sometimes people put too much downward force. Maybe the screwdriver wasn't, quite the right profile, or, like I said, they over torqued them, but those do break off on occasion, especially on old watches that, have been around a while. We pull off this bridge and everything looks pretty good. So far there's nothing major like rust, or, like anything crazy. So that's a good sign. I'm happy with this so far. We're pulling out the third wheel here, and then the center wheel is held into the other side via the cannon pinion. So we'll have to flip it back over to get that out of there. But in the meantime, we can remove our setting lever screw, which actually goes between that. Ooh, some stuff went flying. But it goes between that bridge that we just removed, so we have to make sure to put that in before we reinstall all those parts. And then we have our sliding pinion or clutch pinion and our winding pinion. And looks like we got one stuck in there. So that will probably have to just, I don't know, we'll tip it out and it'll fall out. It's just kind of wedged in there. Pulling out the main barrel, the spring barrel, or the first wheel, it's called. And the main spring for the watch is in there, and that's where the power to drive the hands and do everything we need, it comes from that spring. And so we wind that up each day, and that keeps the watch running. Now, pulling out the cannon pinion, this one's really little, so I actually had to use the side of the tool and gently pull up. And you can see we got it out of there, no problem. Some of these are very, very teeny, and this is a small watch, so I'm not really that surprised that our tool barely could get it out. But got the center wheel there, and that looks pretty good as well. A watch like this is going to be pretty crusty and old looking as you look at some of the parts, and that's to be expected. This thing's probably 70, whatever, it's 70 something years old. So yeah, no problem there. I don't mind a little bit of crustiness. We'll clean it up and get it all back together. Now we're removing this guy right here. This is the cover plate, and normally this has a little spring arm off of it, but this one doesn't appear to have that. And this holds some of the components into place, and make sure that they don't shift around. So as you're trying to set the time on the watch or whatever, you don't have any issues there. So it's giving me a little bit of an issue here coming off, but I think a little oil or grease will help those come off easier. So we'll let that sit for a minute and let it kind of penetrate down, and then this should slide off a little bit easier. And can we get it? You don't want to break anything, so we're just kind of taking it slow. And there we go, came off. And okay, now I see why it was sticking. So you can see we've got a little bit of rust there at the top of that spring. And then this thing's called the yoke, and this helps keep the sliding pinion or clutch pinion into place, and actuates that back and forth. So we'll pull that out of there, and you can see that little bit of rust. It hasn't affected the integrity of anything. The spring probably isn't ideal to be rusty like that, but it's super, super minimal. So who knows where that came from, but yeah, a little bit of rust. And then this is the minute wheel. We'll pull that out. And then that is an intermediate wheel, which connects, your winding parts, your pinions, to your middle wheels. So yeah, now that we have everything out of here, we can take a better look at the body of the movement here, and everything looks good. Now we do have a couple of cap jewels. These have a tiny screw that holds them into place, and ideally you would remove this for cleaning, but I'm not going to because I've had issues with losing those in the past, so I usually just do it after the fact, and that's no big deal. Looking at this next to a 33 millimeter men's watch of the era, this one is maybe half the size, roughly, or maybe a little over a third. The size of a comparable men's watch of the era. So it's kind of a cool engineering feat to make things work as well as they do, and to be this little. So yeah, moving on, we're going to clean this and use a little bit of peg wood, and we're going to peg out the holes, meaning we'll take the sharp part of the wood, and we'll insert it into where the little axles or the pivots for the wheels slash gears go. And that will help remove any old dried up grease or any dirt or things like that that are in there. And this is important because any of that stuff will increase friction and make the watch run worse than it should, and also will inevitably wear things out faster. So the cleaner you can get things, the better. And using a little bit of mechanical force, a little bit of elbow grease, definitely helps out in that situation. Now you can see here our crown wheel has some nice gunked up grease on there, and we can pretty easily dispatch that. We can remove that really easily just with that pegwood. And of course, we're going to clean this in a cleaning solution in my ultrasonic cleaner, and I'll show you that here in a little bit. But this goes a long way to making sure that we get a good clean result, a good baseline, so that as we reassemble everything and lubricate it, it's going to run the way it should. It's going to hopefully run as close to new as possible. So now I'm using kind of a medium to stiff brush here, and this is just like a painting brush, like an artist brush. And I'll go over everything and make sure any chunks of whatever are off and all the grease is off as best as possible. And if I didn't mention, this is 99% isopropyl alcohol, and that's important because it's a little bit of a solvent. It breaks down grease and things like that, but also it's not going to rust the parts. So if we take our time here, we don't have to worry about rusting things out. Now we're loading this up into our little baskets, and then I'm going to lower that into another basket. And this is my little homemade watch cleaning machine, if you will. I have a little basket hooked via some wire. It's similar to like a coat hanger. I just had a spool of this old steel wire, and then I put that into the chuck of my drill, and then we go back and forth, and you can see how much junk came off. And this is a food dehydrator, and we just put that in there for about 15-20 minutes and let that blow a little heat and air past the parts, and it dries it up nicely. Oh, I should say we dunked all this in 99% isopropyl alcohol before we dried it off, and that displaces the water. But you can see how clean the parts came out. They look really, really great, compared to where they were. And we'll pull all these out, and we'll kind of assess things, make sure nothing's stuck to another thing and wet still, or all that good stuff. And there's no rhyme or reason here to how I'm placing parts. I'm just kind of getting them out and making sure nothing too crazy is going on there. I was asked one time how you keep all these parts straight after you mix them all up together. And really, you just kind of, after a while, know where things go, and you just get a feel for it. So as I'm putting them back together, I generally know where parts are or where they should go. So as I'm putting it back together, I just kind of hunt and peck through the array of parts, and I grab the one I want and put it where it should go next. So it's a little bit like putting together a puzzle. You just have to find the right piece and put it where it goes. So it's not too complicated after you've done it, a few dozen times. Now, this train of wheels here is, this is kind of unique. They're a little bit more in line than most that I've worked on, and you can see it's a little bit of like figuring out which orientation they go and that kind of thing. And also, they're really similar in size. So, I'm just going to get these in there, and then we're going to see if it's working the way it should and kind of hope for the best. Normally, I don't review my footage or anything like that or take very detailed notes, which is normally okay. Sometimes it doesn't work out, but yeah, we're just having fun here, and we're going to get this thing together. You can see they kind of all stack into place there. And then we can't forget our set lever screw, because it sandwiches between this bridge and the kind of the body of the movement. And if you forget it, you have to take all this back apart, and that's no fun. Ask me how I know that. I've done it many, many times. So we're getting it in there. We're lining up the pivots for the arbor as well as the center wheel there. And then we have a bridge for the train of wheels. And you can see we have our 3 pivots. And these gears are kind of balanced in place, and and the pivots have to line up. And so we're making sure that we're kind of wiggling a little bit, and we're not putting a ton of pressure downwards because we don't want to snap any of those. They're really, really tiny, like smaller than a needle that you'd sew with. And so they can break pretty easily. So I'm not putting a ton of force down. I'm just kind of wiggling it into place. Speaking of parts, I do have several movements that I could use as donors. And these are, like I said, I had a few family heirlooms in my family, and I fixed those up for my family and delivered those to my grandmother as well as my wife's mother. So we have a few of these floating around in the family, and they're really sentimental. So in fixing those, I actually ordered a few of these movements as well. So I do actually have quite a few spare parts. Speaking of those screws that broke, we have some of those. So we're in luck. We don't even have to wait to order parts or anything. That's a really nice luxury. Normally, I work on very different movements, so I typically don't have spare parts. So if something goes south or if something was broken, you just deal with it, and you got to wait, 2 weeks to a month, sometimes more, to find parts. So and have them delivered. So luckily, I don't think that's going to be the case here. But with the little pegwood there, I'm not pressing down very hard at all. But you can see now the escape wheel is not spinning, so something's not lined up. So we go back and forth until eventually it moves very freely, and there's not a ton of friction, and that those go into their proper pivots. I'll keep working on that, and we'll get it to the point where they spin very freely, and then that's how we'll know it's all together. So once we get those, spinning freely, we can move on, and I'm going to lubricate where the, our wheels will go, and I'm going to install what's called the click spring that we took out earlier, and then we'll put the click in, and then there's a little post on the bottom of that, a little notch that catches that spring, and that's how it goes back and forth. And this ratchets against what's called the ratchet wheel, and that's where it gets its name. And when you actually wind up the watch and you get that little clicking sound, that's where it comes from, the click. Again, we're going to line this square up, which is the piece going through goes to the center of the spring on the mainspring. And that's called the arbor, and it has a square end. It's kind of like a carriage bolt. If you've ever built a piece of furniture or something that uses those square ends that keep it from spinning, it's the same idea here. If we used a circular shaft, then it wouldn't be able to hold any tension or transfer that power. So that's a pretty important piece, but easy to line up, no big deal. We're gonna put in this again. This is the opposite threaded screw on the crown wheel, and be careful with those. They're really, really delicate, so you don't want to snap that off. But yeah, and then we can move on to installing the pallet fork. So the pallet fork, as I mentioned earlier, kind of swings back and forth, and that's what impulses or kind of knocks against the jewel that's on the bottom of that little flywheel called the impulse jewel. And that's what creates that back and forth swinging or rotating of the little. It's called the balance, but I'll refer to it often as a flywheel because that's essentially what it is. And we're gonna put in the bridge for the pallet fork here, and then we can actually test to make sure everything's working by winding up the watch a little bit, and this should snap back and forth pretty quickly. So you want to, as you nudge it one way, it should leave the end of the tool and move itself. And we're going to give this thing a little nudge, and there it goes. The balance is absolutely ripping, and I don't think it should be I'm happy it's moving, but I don't think it should be going that fast. So I'm going to have to do a little bit of digging here and maybe backtrack a little bit, but I've never seen a balance move that quickly. I'll throw it on the time grapher to confirm, but that I'm not going crazy. But I think everything's moving a little quickly, so our gears might be backwards or something like that. But in the meantime, I'm going to lubricate things real quick, and we're going to throw in our keyless works. Just to give it a chance to if it does wind down, then we'll be able to see what's going on. But yeah, we're putting in the cannon pinion in the center, and then we'll put our hour wheel in, and that goes right over the cannon pinion. And but before that, we probably want to put in our minute wheel, because that normally goes on top of, the hour wheel usually goes on top of that. So we'll flip the order. Yeah, there we go. You can see the smaller gear in the center there lines up with that one. And then we will put on our intermediate wheel. Again, that kind of connects our pinion here to those wheels. And then this pinion slides back and forth, and it will either touch the winding pinion right here, or it will touch that intermediate wheel. And in the center of this will actually be your stem, which is, kind of like hooks to the crown. And that rotates because it's got a square, the shaft is square, and so it rotates against these parts. All right, so now we're gonna insert the yoke spring here, and we're gonna cover that up with our little piece of wood here to hold that into place so it doesn't go flying away. And yeah, everything looks good with that. And we're going to insert our cover plate here, and that just kind of holds into place via those two posts there. And then we'll insert a screw here, and that's nice and easy. Now, our setting lever is what holds the hand into place, but also helps us shift from either setting the watch or winding it. And to install this, we hold it down with our finger on one side, and then we'll actually tighten the screw, the setting lever screw that we installed earlier, and we screw that in through the back side of the movement, or the watchmaker side of the movement. And we'll test all that stuff out, and if it works, we're good to go. So moving on, I'm going to let the power out of the spring again. Yeah, as you can see, I'm moving the click out of the way, and then the friction from my fingertips on the crown slows it down enough that, we don't just like instantaneously release that. And that's to avoid, damaging anything with too much power being released at once. Now we're moving the bridge again for the train of wheels. We'll see what we got going on here. I have a suspicion that it's actually the third and fourth wheel being flipped backwards. Now, normally these are quite different in size and, kind of form factor, but they're super similar. But, I think those are about the only ones that I could flip backwards. So I'm going to try this, give it a go, and see if that fixes it. And so we'll line that up with the bottom pivot there and get that into place. And then we'll work on the next wheel and repeat the same process as before, making sure that we, don't break the pivots, and we're taking our time. So this is not the end of the world. This is not the biggest setback, but you do just kind of have to deal with it and be patient. And, I like to leave little things like this in my videos because I easily could edit it out and trick everyone to think that I'm a perfect watchmaker. But I think for other people trying to get into this, or, people that have been doing it a while and often run into little snafus like this, I think it's helpful to, see that other people are normal and make little mistakes here and there and all that good stuff. The nice thing about watchmaking is if you do make mistakes, you get essentially infinite redos for most things. Unless you're breaking a part or losing it or whatever, there's really not much damage done by, doing things improperly the first time. Be careful, but if you put a part in the wrong orientation or whatever, usually it just doesn't work. And then you flip it around and then it does work. So just be really careful. Try not to break anything or gouge anything, snap anything, that kind of thing, and you're good to go. Take your time and have fun, We're getting that in there. Normally I would remove the balance, and that makes it a little bit easier to check our work and avoid damaging that. But, I was feeling particularly brazen here, apparently. We're going to add a little wind back into the watch and see if it runs by itself. After a little bit of push with some wind, we got it going. Now, these little cap jewels on the back side, you can see there's a flat portion on the bottom, and that's where our oil will go. So we'll clean that off in a 1-dip solution, And to show you here what that looks like, we've got it flipped over here, and this is the bottom side that actually makes contact with, the setting. And we're going to put about 2/3 of the circumference or the area of the cap jewel. We're going to cover that in a very thin oil, and that's going to keep a little bit of oil suspended in there with capillary action, and make sure that it's where it needs to be for a long time to come, and keep this thing lubricated. If you put too much, it can actually pull out of that setting and go where it shouldn't be, and essentially you'll be running a dry jewel. And if you put too little, of course, it's not going to lubricate the way it should. So you just want to be careful and get just the right amount in there. And no, you definitely can't just like spray WD-40 into these things and get them going. A few of my friends I've talked to are like, yeah, I have an old watch and I just hosed it down, and I'm like, great, it'll run for a little while, and then you're gonna have a big mess. But that's beside the point. Anyways, moving on, cleaning up the case. I'm using a little bit of a swab here, and I'm getting off any dirt and gunk on there as best I can before we polish this up. And this case isn't in too bad a shape. It's got obviously some wear and tear, but I think it'll be nice and easy. I'm going to use just a really mild metal polish on this, and we'll just use a little bit of elbow grease. I'll spend probably 15-20 minutes doing this and getting it nice and shined up. I'm not going to sand it down or do anything crazy like that, because this is gold plated. It's gold. It's called rolled gold. It's a 10K rolled gold casing, and that means that it's got a thicker layer than many types of plating, like electrostatic plating, but it's not fully gold. So we can technically, polish through that gold layer, and then you'll have bronze, and that eventually will oxidize, and it doesn't look very pretty. So we're going to want to keep as much gold as we can on this thing, but fortunately for us, we can polish it up because it is kind of a thicker layer. But yeah, moving on, we're going to clean up the dial here, and we're going to use a little bit of distilled water and just that, and rub it off with this little swab again, and just trying to get off any dirt or any chunks of whatever on there. Often you'll get a little bit of fungus, or you get a little of that green verdigris stuff, that the green stuff. But yeah, this one looks pretty good. This is a teeny watch, and under magnification you can see a couple little scuffs from installing the hands or maintaining this over the years. There's a little bit of glue on there from replacing the crystal, gluing that into place. But you really can't see any of that stuff, especially from 3 feet away when you're reading the watch. So yeah, we're going to install the dial here, and there's a couple of screws there, just like before. Reverse order, we're going to install those, and then we're going to put the hands on, and this is our hand here. And we line these up on 12 o'clock just to make it easier. We want the hands to, as the hour hand passes one of the numbers, you want the minute hand to be at the top. So we just line those up the best we can to make sure that happens. We're going to put the back case on there, and you can see it kind of just sandwiches, the movement sandwiches right in between the back and front one there. And then the tolerance is pretty tight, so you just kind of smush it together like a little sandwich, and then we're good to go. Now I'm going to try something new here. This is called Renaissance polish. It's a wax, and they use this at museums for archival work, to protect historic pieces from being oxidized or exposed to the elements, that kind of thing. And so this is a pH neutral wax that can go on and protect things like these little indices that we polished up a little bit, and it will just help it stay shiny for longer. And that wax is nice because it won't damage anything that it's put on. So yeah, I'm going to start using that on the hands and the indices from now on, and we'll see how that goes. But that's a new little trick I picked up, and a new product. Yeah, so as you can see, the thing's coming together pretty well. And I'm going to leave the back just how it is. It doesn't look too bad. I kind of like the look of a little bit of scuffs on an old watch like this. So we're going to kind of split the middle and make it look pretty new, but not overwork this thing. So I'll spend a little bit more time polishing this thing up and getting a more even finish on it. You can see I'm just getting in there. I could remove the crystal to make this a little bit easier, but I'm not using anything so aggressive that if I did have it touch the crystal, it's going to damage it, or vice versa. So really, I'm just going to leave it into place. It seems like it's already glued in really well, and I don't have to worry about that too much. But yeah, I do have glue, and we could easily take it out and re-glue it into place, but it's all good. Yeah, it's working great. Now the band you can see is kind of the before, and then the watch is maybe an after, but we'll keep working on this, and then after a while you can see the band looks really great. Here's the full before, and then the after. So I hope this watch serves Evelynn as a bit of a reminder of this time in her life and about that childhood curiosity that can bring you so much joy and fulfillment in this life. And keep that alive, because some of the greatest things I've experienced in my life have all come from being like, wow, that's cool. Let me get into it. Including watchmaking and my entire career and all kinds of stuff. So I think that's a really great thing. And, again, I hope you just really enjoy this. And I hope you enjoyed watching the video of me working on this. And thanks again for the Girl Scout cookies. They went fast, but they were delicious. We'll see you guys for the next one. Bye.